content to get through tonight. This is a subject that I'm very passionate about, so I'm going to give quite a lot of information and then some time at the end to for any questions. So my name's Charlotte Watts. I'm thrilled here to be offering this introduction to yoga for the microbiome through the Give Back Yoga University. It's a virtual campus for yoga professionals, healthcare workers, and academic researchers to share knowledge and exchange ideas. And so today, delving into this world of the microbiome, small living in its literal translation, for me, this is bringing together an area, a realm, a territory that I have been fascinated by. Also my work as a nutritional therapist, which I've been for 20 years, which really ties in for me with my yoga teaching, which tends to be of a quite therapeutic nature, draws in somatics, so also has a very fascial, fluid, explorative nature, and all of this always, for me, sparking interest about how things are connected and how we can come to this idea of whole, which is very much part of the yoga model of wellness. So I explore a lot of this content within my book, Yoga Therapy for Digestive Health, and also this is part of the reason I wanted to do this subject. It's part of research for my upcoming book on yoga and somatics for immune and respiratory health. So we need to start with the question, what is the microbiome? Certainly a word that more people have heard of recently. It used to be a thing that we kind of bandied about in the nutritional therapy world and others, but was less well known. And these days, we're more and more aware that is this huge colonization of microbes, not just living inside us, but outside us, with us. We evolved with them, and they outnumber our body's own cells. And that evolution alongside them is very much reflective of the fact that we are part of nature, not that there's nature and there's us, but that any separation that we have only works within our whole system, our own systemic organism, to our detriment. So most people know about the gut microbiome. We're going to open that out to the whole body, but that in and of itself weighs about 2 kilos. All of those, the mass of that bacteria weighs 2 kilograms, more than the 1.4 kilogram human brain, and may have just as much influence over our bodies, which we will explore in a little more detail. This core microbiome, our core microbiome, not just the gut, but the whole of our body, our kind of basis, our foundational basis, is formed in the first few years of life, not just ideally when we come through the vaginal canal, but also from placental bacteria as well. And this can change over time in response to many different factors. This is our epigenetics. This is the different responses our body has as we go through life, and change the expression of our body and our genes according to diet, medications, lifestyle, the stresses, the traumas that we have, the variety and a variety of environmental exposures of many ways. So we can add in there as part and parcel of that story of our whole being, our relationship with our body, embodied awareness, that bringing our physical and all aspects of self into consciousness, and a mindfulness of our movement and how that feels in terms of our listening in and responding. So our microbiomes, not just in the gut, but in all of these sites across the body, mainly where we are in contact with the outside world. Now, a lot of those other places are more obviously kind of invaginations, these orifices that turn inwards from the skin, which is a huge host of microbiome. But our gut tube as well, from mouth to anus, which is essentially always outside the body, unless something is broken down in the digestive tract, moves across the gut barrier and into the bloodstream. It's technically still outside, which is why if you eat that piece of sweet corn and you see it in the toilet bowl completely intact, it's because technically it never entered your body at all. And so our gut lining and our gut microbiome can be seen as an extension of our skin microbiome and all of it. And yes, you can see here it changes in composition as it moves throughout the body. But we can think of everything as being absolutely interconnected. And that extends out to interconnection with nature, with the environment around us, where there are microbiomes in the air, in plants, in the soil. And yes, we are meeting those, and they are talking to our own microbiome all the time. So much of these commensurate and surrounding microbes that we live with are in communication and always the same. So it's not that just simply that the microbes in soil are the same ones that inhabit our gut. We can have very specific human strain bacteria, which is why we take those specifically in probiotics. But that's not to say that the microbes we take in from plants, from soil, through nature, don't have a beneficial effect upon us. They do support our own microbiome. So part of the presence and the evolution with the microbiome and the way our health runs, the way that we are constantly adapting and communicating to the world around us and responding hopefully as appropriately as possible, is that it's a sense of outsourcing. So a good example of how we outsource to the microbiome is the role that so much of our probiotic bacteria in the gut play in our breaking our food down, in our digestive processes. And digestion is a really energy-rich process. So we tend to outsource that, not just for us to find our own energy, but to co-opt that from this colonization. And it's also referred to as the second human genome. So that refers to the fact that there are thousands of species of microbes, not only bacteria, but also fungi and archaea, which are single-celled organisms, very like bacteria, but slightly different, which are really important in the gut and the mouth and on the skin. Now, all of that has about as many as 20 million genes among them. When you compare that to the fact that we've only got 20,000, we are looking to that colonization for a huge amount of our genetic material that is what is actually communicating in what needs to happen in the body at any given time, really having a key role within function and within optimal function when it's optimally healthy levels. You'll notice viruses aren't in there because actually they're part of something separate, which is the virome. And they do often get lumped in, but technically viruses are not living beings, so they can't be part of a biome, which refers to something which is biological, which is living. So often now more and more the virome is referred to separately. That's a whole other issue. So gut bacteria can make and use nutrients and other ways that the human body cannot. So we're using the genetic material within these to help us process so much of the food and any other substances that are coming into the body. So our microbiome is part of our immune system and specifically part of our innate immunity. So that is the part of our immunity which is the first line of response. It's a quick and immediate response, so always there ready to support us. It's different to the acquired immunity, which we tend to hear more about, which is the one that's more about specific antibodies or specificity in terms of how we address, destroy very specific antigens or components, and coronavirus is the one that's obviously most in everyone's consciousness at the moment. But our innate immunity is incredibly important to support how the acquired immunity works, and how it works most efficiently, particularly as the innate acquired immunity doesn't kick in for weeks in terms of creating antibodies. So our innate immunity is absolutely key, much more than it's often given credit for. But part of the innate immunity, some of that is chemical barrier, secretions, chemical processes, and some of it is more structural. It might be referred to as more mechanical barriers or the endothelial system. And this includes the skin and membranes that line our mouths, nose, airways, lungs, urinary tract, gastrointestinal organs, all of those places, which then, when they are intact with a healthy microbiome, as part of their soil, if like their terrain, they provide a physical barrier, very responsive. It's not a rigid set barrier. It's very responsive, changing, moving, constantly regenerating barrier against the entry of toxins and harmful organisms. And it's this which we are moving into in a physical practice, and even the more subtle practices of touch, of mudra, of meditation, when we are aware of where the outer world meets our interior world. We are constantly having this relationship with these barriers in terms of where our boundaries are, in terms of enough in mental processes and in physical processes, and whole host of things that are very much about the whole orchestration, the poetry, the rhythm, the pulse of you, us as an organisms, and how we meet other people with our outer boundaries. So part of that process is also replenishing the linings of the gut and the skin continually. We are renewed, anew, resourced, absolutely constantly. Linings of the gut replenish and fully replace about every 5 days. So there's always the potential for this regrowth, this regeneration that we can take a conscious role in. And that's replacing damaged and dying cells with new ones. So really supporting our regenerative capacity, and adaptation to stress responses are something that are really key within there, which we'll have a look at. So it's important to recognize that the immune system is not innately hardwired to tell the difference between a harmless symbiont and a threatening pathogenic, i.e., what is good, what is bad. And that extends out to our innate immunity, which is constantly tracking safe, unsafe in this way, self and non-self. So this is where both the innate immunity and that presence of the microbiome are really key within autoimmune conditions as well. So it's the microbe that makes that distinction clear, whether that is safe, unsafe, or self, non-self. And another nod there to the fact that that's such an important part of our communication with the outside world and our sense of self in relation to the outside world. So another part of the microbiome that is absolutely key is the oral microbiome. And this really feeds into the gut microbiome because the mouth is the first entry of food. We'll look at how nasal breathing also really comes in for the health of the oral microbiome a bit later on, but just to give an overview at this point. This paper here states that the oral cavity has the second largest and diverse microbiota after the gut, harboring over 700 species of bacteria, crucial to health as it can cause both oral and systemic disease. And if we look at how that ripples out potentially into the whole of the body, very much that if we're leaving bacteria to fester, unwanted, more pathogenic, harmful bacteria around into the gums, and gingivitis, inflammation of the gums, is so prevalent in the modern world for various many reasons, diet, mouth breathing, postural issues. That those it's very well known that those embedded bacteria very easily become systemic, very easily go into the bloodstream and around the body. And it's a very gum disease is a very well-known link comorbidity with heart disease, for instance, for that reason. But having a sense of that orality, the line, the embryological tube all the way down from the mouth down into the gut, and looking after ourselves, that self-care around that area, which might include things like gargling and other cleansing practices. So the gut gets a lot of press in terms of supporting the microbiome there, but it's really important as we're looking out for the whole body that and particularly when we're looking at breathing practices and moving around the diaphragm and bringing consciousness to diaphragmatic movement all the way around the body, that we're also looking at the health of the lungs, and they have an enormous surface area, just like the guts. They have loads and loads of branches, bronchioles, that essentially create an enormous surface area for gas exchange, and all of these are supported by a microbiome there. They not only support the immunity at the lung wall, at that exchange between the lungs and the bloodstream, but also for things like gas exchange and nitric oxide production in the body, which is a really key part of our immunity, our innate immunity, and also very much linked into nasal breathing again, which is really supportive for that environment. And all of those interlinked. So we'll talk about the gut-brain axis, but we also have the lung-brain axis, and all of them talking. So we often talk about axes within the realm of health, looking at the body, as if they're just kind of one directional, but really this stuff is completely orchestrated. We pull things out and give them different names, but ultimately we are only differentiating to integrate that sense of whole that we yoga model of wellness states that we're just, if we have dis-ease, we are looking for what may be interrupting that flow of prana, and looking for how we can come back to those states of sukha, of ease, of dropping into our most natural of rhythms. So gut-brain axis here, and it is called the gut-brain and not the brain-gut axis, because most of the communication, said to be about 80 to 90%, is gut back up to the brain stem, is affecting upwards through the vagus nerve. And a lot of that is letting us know the state of play in terms of our gut and gut feelings. Our enteric nervous system, part of the third branch of the autonomic nervous system after the sympathetic, the parasympathetic, and now the enteric nervous system tends to be put underneath the umbrella of the autonomic nervous system, which it didn't used to be. But just to sort of show how much that is borne up in our moving between states of active, not active, reactivity, and survival or rest. And our gut feelings are very real, felt through the enteric nervous system, and all of that second brain in the gut are relaying very much with the help of the microbiome, which I'll say the different ways that does that a bit later on, back up to the brain to be constantly feeling out if we feel safe, unsafe. It's very much part of like the innate immune system is doing, very much like the mind is doing. It has that kind of tracking vigilance of just how are things, and the vagus nerve constantly sending that, but not just that information, but also information about function too. So that has caught up in our neurotransmitters. We produce a huge amount of neurotransmitters on the gut wall, which is the microbiome has a large part to play in. But stress can very much dampen the other way down, top down. The enteric nervous system can get on with things itself and send those gut feelings back up and have that gut function. But as soon as we go into stress responses, the central nervous system can halt digestive function. And often it can also halt those very kind of more open ventral vagus reflective feelings through the gut as well. So a lot of those will kind of switch over into more survival, fear-based modes when stress responses take over. So we evolved in this gut-brain axis, and the gut and brain evolved as one long tube that developed from the same embryological tissue, starting out from the center, the yolk moving in towards the enfolding fetal shape to become that place of the belly and that place of nourishment up to the mouth and then down to the anus, to the tail, essentially. And these stay in constant communication in sleep-wake cycles and responses to internal and external information. And that's constantly a part of the microbiome has a role to play in there. And the placental microbiome will also plug in there at this place at the umbilicus, you can see at the middle. So looking at the influence that stress plays, and particularly in terms of that relationship with the immunity on the gut wall, which is such a key part of our immune system, and the immune system on the gut wall that's supported and activated by the microbiome is really the only largest part of the body, the innate immunity, which is anti-inflammatory. Inflammation is also a part of innate immunity, which is a very important part. If you're in the stress, when you go into the stress response, there's the understanding you're going to be running away from something to save your life, or standing your ground to fight and protect yourself in that way. So the potential that you will bleed to death, be wounded, or get an infection and die of sepsis is a really serious survival worry in the wild. And so inflammation is there as a very key part of the stress response and survival. And the gut environment is really the only place that brings down those responses in terms of inflammation, systemic inflammation. And part of that's because the digestion is actually innervated by rest and digest, by the sympathetic nervous system, where everything else in the body is innervated, gets going through the sympathetic. That's the more active, so it kind of switches over in some way. So the gut is really, and gut microbiome is really involved in immune modulation. That is appropriate immune response, not too little, not too much. We don't want the immune system just boosted. Boosting the immune system is a really clumsy phraseology. We want it to have appropriate response. So often things are in over response, getting caught in inflammation or in not recognizing self in autoimmune conditions. So that immune modulation is a key part of the microbiome through secretory IgA antibodies on the gut wall, which really rely on the microbiome for a happy home there. But the probiotic, which is the opposite of antibiotic, and antibiotics are very detrimental to the microbiome, also produce lactase for milk digestion, particularly when we're young, produce certain vitamins like B vitamins, vitamin K, lower the pH of the colon so it can have best elimination, enhance peristalsis, gut motility, which is incredibly important for the microbiome itself, to make sure that the right types of bacteria are in the right parts of the gut and just keep moving down. We don't become overgrown in the small intestine, which is often referred to as SIBO, or small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. But like anything, we don't want too little, too much. They also support liver function, and they keep the gas environment of the gut in its optimal capacity. So we can tell when they're out of whack often. We can get gassy, quite bloaty. And they also create fuel for the colon, things like short-chain fatty acids that really feed cells in not just the colon, but the whole of the gut lining as well. So stress has shown to reduce levels of probiotic bacteria. That's been very easy to show in research, often with students who are stool tested. It's not an invasive test, it just involves taking a stool and seeing what the bacterial content of that is before and after an exam. And it has been shown that stress really depletes or changes the constituency of the microbiome in the gut. And part of that's believed because our gut is so communicative between us in terms of the tribe. We sync up gut bacteria. It's really helpful for us to have animals around. I've contact with pets because they also, I think, it's quite the same, but it has that very real responsive quality for our microbiome. And there's a communication there that if your microbiome is in a certain way, then you must be in the need to protect yourself from perceived danger. So it keeps the HPA axis, which is the hypothalamus pituitary adrenal axis, which is what gets set off brain to adrenals in the stress response. When our levels of probiotic bacteria are low, our HPA axis tends to set off more. We tend to be more reactive to stress. So it's coming into this realm of probiotics, often referred to as psychobiotics, having such an inherent relationship with our psychological states and our mood. So one of the ways that yoga, research around yoga has been so really quite, a lot of the body research has been quite prevalent here in terms of yoga as a mind-body therapy. So this research, to be clear, isn't just about asana. It is about the whole canon, as it were, a whole system: breath, consciousness, attention, mindful practices, have been shown effective at reducing inflammatory cytokines. So there's immune messages that set off inflammation and keep saying, danger, danger, over here, over here. So again, that's one term that most people didn't know before COVID, and a lot of people heard cytokine storms now, which are things that people who tend to have more severe symptoms or even die from coronavirus. That tends to be because of this upregulation of inflammation, these cytokine storms. And yoga and the microbiome have a very regulatory effect, reducing inflammatory cytokines through the resulting alterations in neuroendocrine, neural and psychological and behavioral processes. And difficult to find research specifically on the microbiome and yoga, but there is, it's like all of these epigenetic factors. We are built to move. We're built to have healthy, expressive movement, but not be sedentary as we mostly are. And that sedentary behaviors really do affect the microbiome negatively. Exercise has shown to influence the gut microbiota, stimulating the development of gut bacteria. So one of the ways that yoga influences our stress regulation, and where this meets our microbiome, is that yoga practices, mindfulness practices, meditation have shown in research to help us produce levels of our own, one of our neurotransmitters called GABA, or gamma aminobutyric acid. And this is an inhibitory neurotransmitter, meaning it's of the more parasympathetic tones of the nervous system. It brings us down, it's soothing. Often the one cited about stilling the mind, and the one that tends to shut off brain chatter. And it's so important for us to help go to things like sleep and stay asleep. Our GABA is also produced on the gut wall, as is acetylcholine, which is the main neurotransmitter of the parasympathetic nervous system, is also related to memory. And that is produced on the gut wall by the lactobacillus species. That and the bifidobacteria species below, which also synthesize GABA. Those are two main colonizing bacteria in the whole body. We produce a huge amount of neurotransmitters in the gut, the same type of neurotransmitters we produce in the brain, and they do go throughout the whole body, but they don't necessarily go across the blood-brain barrier. So the same kind of serotonin on the gut wall, and 95% of our serotonin in the body is on the gut wall, and only the rest of it, rather than the brain, that doesn't go into the brain, but it does translate and it does communicate. We'll see how in a second. And then you can see that other species have been researched, and we're at the infancy of this research, to show that they are part of production and regulation and utilization of neurotransmitters on the gut wall, which have a whole body-wide and digestive process effect. So research has observed that many people with irritable bowel syndrome are also depressed. So these links of the gut and the brain that have, for those who tend to have mental health issues or digestive issues, will all often see these happening in concert or kind of dropping between each other. People on the autistic spectrum tend to have digestive problems. People with Parkinson's are prone to constipation, and an increase in depression in people is seen in people taking antibiotics, but not antiviral or antifungal medications that leave gut bacteria unharmed. So those are some examples of research findings, and this really ties in then to how we can see here this this lovely diagram from article in the journal Science, that bacterial residence of the intestines may influence neurons and the brain through several routes that are really at our infancy of understanding. So substances can be secreted by the microbes into the gut, which may infiltrate blood vessels for a direct ride to the brain. Microbes prompt neuropod cells, these little feet-like cells in the gut lining, to stimulate the vagus nerve, which connects directly to the brain, back up the gut-brain axis. More indirectly, microbes activate inside endocrine cells and more local parts of our hormone system in the gut lining, which send hormones throughout the body. And then even more indirectly, gut microbes influence immune cells and inflammation, as we touched on before, which can affect the brain. So a quick mention of fascia here. I'm not going to go into this too deeply because it's such a large area, but it's so bound up in our inflammatory processes and this kind of chicken and egg, this backwards and forwards communication between all parts of us, fascia, or interstitium, with fluids between cells, back into the microbiome, back through our barriers, our epithelium, and this is really part of where movement comes in as well, and particularly when we have lack of movement that is like our primal movement, that which we are designed to do, and in our practices that might turn up in things like squatting, lunging, fetal positions. I did kind of Z-leg sit. I'll definitely doing the workshop on Wednesday to keep things pliable, hydrated, with free communication and organization through the fascia that allows for most optimal communication. Without that, we tend to lesions and adhesions in the fascia, which we can also get from sedentary behaviors when we're not just moving, like we're designed to move. And when we tend to those grunty, those knots, or those like the interruptions in the fascia, or little bits of scar tissue, or hardenings, or seizing between organs, and parts of the digestive tract, then that tends to create inflammation. They can tend to be sites of inflammation, which can create pain, which can change the way we move around them. And that fascial tissue can also be affected by any visceral, genetic, metabolic, vascular, epigenetic issues, all of which the microbiome is bound up in terms of our whole body communication. And when that ripples through the fascia, symptoms can show health deterioration beyond that which medical diagnosis methods would suggest. So often people will have what is often called idiopathic gut stuff going on, which just means of unknown origin, but that's often being understood to be linked more and more back to the fascial organ, the microbial organ, the interstitial organ. So chronic fatigue syndrome, fibromyalgia, examples associated with the fascial system, particularly when present for several years and often comorbid with these digestive issues and the gut microbiome there. So there's also communication with the lymphatic system, which is also what we can employ, this moving around of this part of the innate immunity with our movement, with our organ body, because so much of the lymphatic sites are directly into organ bodies and sites where the microbiome is meeting them. So the lymphocytes, these immune cells in the lymphatic system, T cells and B cells, which are mostly of the innate immunity, but some, and they communicate, they're quite a branch between the acquired immunity as well. Of these, 70% of the immune system is there as gut-associated lymphoid tissue, which has a close association with the microbiome through the gut lining. And we can access all of these from the outside in. This is the rippling through the fascia from this place at the skin, and we can access and directly communicate that with movement, rubbing around on the ground. Like there are a lot of somatic practices, which is a lot of rolling around on the ground, changing weight distribution, that compression into fascia, and then a flooding to move tissues through, to hydrate throughout the system, to keep tissues enlivened. So we're keeping the sites like tending a garden of where our microbiome can live. Massage, touch, increasing things like oxytocin and the feel-good beta endorphins that ripple through to allow us to be in social engagement, parasympathetic nervous systems where things heal, where they can flourish. They're not just in the more kind of breaking down tone of survival mode. And because we're social engaged creatures, we need that touch. And part of that microbiome on the outside that communicates all the way in through these layers is that outside touch and contact with others. So out to the skin microbiome from the inside, and we are constantly moving our attention and our consciousness presence from the inside out, from the outside in. And we will, in the session on Wednesdays, we will feel that out in terms of our boundaries as well, that communication coming into center of our body and out. So recognizing that our skin, lung, gut lining can all be considered interfaces with the outside world. So as I said before, the gut is a turning inwards, like a big donut. It's the inside bit of the donut. The gut interface is around 98.4 square feet. So it's not in meters. While the skin is 328 square feet. It's a huge surface which we meet the outside world, and it is expecting to meet the outside world. We have clothes, we have hot houses, but our skin is expecting to have contact with nature. It's a huge part of our immunity, and things can go quite awry when we don't get enough outside contact. So I get a lot of clients to dry brush, to have that eustress, that good stress on the outer layers. And every inch of our skin contains over 2.5 million bacteria. Makeup of our skin microbiome varies greatly depending on us, our individual makeup, our own stories, the environments we grew up in, our mothers, or other caregivers, any skin we come in contact with, our pets, the whole shebang, the story of us, as well as where it is on the area of the skin. So touch is so important for rippling through. And lovely paper here from 2020 stating that oxytocin, that hormone we produce in terms of social engagement, in terms of often called the love molecule. It's the one we get skin to skin. It's the one that babies particularly have breastfeeding with mother, or caregivers can have with a child coming in contact, or we can get from a sustained hug or touch, even from ourselves, from over 20 seconds. And that modulates immunostatus, status regulation, modulation of our immune system, metabolic state, and the gut microbiome. The physical boundaries we have are these outer layers, often referred to as the epithelium in terms of their biochemistry. These are one of 4 basic types of animal tissue, along with connective tissue, muscle tissue, and nervous tissue. Our epithelial tissues line the outer surfaces of the organs and blood vessels throughout the body, as well as the inner surface of cavities in many internal organs. So a big example of this is the epidermis, the outermost skin layer, and very much part of the health of our boundaries, this place where the microbiome lives, but also a huge part of our sensing, our sensory sensing in terms of our own felt boundaries. That can be back through the enteric nervous system again. So functions of the epithelial cells include secretion, selective absorption, protection, transcellular transport, and sensing. And they have nerve supply but no blood supply, so that's why they're kind of outer. And most receive nourishment via diffusion of substances from the underlying connective tissue through a basement membrane. And we can see here then that the microbiome at the bottom has a huge part to play in our vascular and endothelial health. And a lot of that is then playing a part on whether we are able to resolve something like inflammation on the endothelium, or if it stays unresolved, actually, a kind of inflammation that stays, and whether we're able to have full repair, full regeneration of injury to that area. That also plays a huge part in nitric oxide production, which is mentioned before as the gas, which is key part of our immune system, and it's part of the gas exchange in the lungs, particularly when we nasal breathe. So it's really kind of throughout the body and in contact with the microbiome at those levels, including, this might be the lung surface as well. So these are all the places on the skin where our microbiome is located. One of the things this shows us in terms of our microbiome is how much over hygiene or washing with overwashing or washing with things that really destroy, like very strong antibacterials, can really affect our immunity, because they're affecting the health, the integrity of our microbiome, particularly overuse of antibacterials. There's very good research to show how that destroys or changes the composition of the health of our skin microbiome, which is so important for all of those layers. And factors in the skin microbiome health can be so many things. It can be underlying pathology from the inside out, underlying conditions like diabetes, our nutritional status, things like our omega-3 oils. If they tend to be low, we can tend to dry out in the skin, and then that doesn't leave it leaves a more hostile environment for the microbiome to grow in. Can change in terms of our sex, age. Our microbiome tends to deplete as we become older if we are tending to things like stress or other factors that reduce that. Has lower skin microbiome has been associated with more signs of aging, and things like lifestyle as well. In there we can see occupation, hygiene, which is interesting. I'm not sure if they're referring to over or under hygiene there, and our own kind of susceptibilities and genotyping as well. So in terms of all that free flow of movement around the body and all of that inside out potential for health and the communication of all of these systems and this microbiome we are home to, mentioned before, sedentary behaviors are incredibly detrimental to health on many, many levels. As much as anything, they don't get lymphatics going, they don't get circulation out to those endothelial layers, the home of the microbiome. They don't allow us to move into the lungs. If we just drop down into the diaphragm, we get that loss of abdominal tone, that loss of movement, of gut motility, that was also key part of the housing of a healthy microbiome. And we can, I'll come to a second in terms of the way that that also changes our, tends to create us shunting the head forward. It tends to, and you can see text neck at the bottom right hand corner here, which tends to shunt the head forward of the pelvis and really tends to predicate people towards mouth breathing, which is dries out the tissues and dries out the and can really affect the oral microbiome. So coming out of that and allowing us to evolve out of this new hunched shape, this kind of fetal, but less restorative than a conscious fetal position, is often the route out for many people, as well as reducing stress responses, because this is a stressor. This is not how we're designed to be. So nasal breathing, as I mentioned, can have a massive effect on the health of the oral microbiome, and that then down may modulate the activities of the microbiome, and that's from the journal all about nitric oxide. Whole journal to itself. It's such a key part of our immune modulation and health, and how we have gas exchange and efficient oxygen, carbon dioxide exchange. So nasal breathing has also been related to brainwave coherence, how we organize our responses to things, and our cognitive processing, health of the lung tissues, activating parasympathetic fibers, more efficient oxygen to carbon dioxide exchange, the first defense of innate immunity via nasal microbiome and the hairs there. The immune system is expecting, hoping the air goes through there. The mouth is for food, the air is for the nose, as B.K.S. Iyengar often very famously stated. More diaphragmatic involvement when we breathe through the nose, more movement into the lung tissues, and the air, the oxygen goes further down into the back of the lungs and activates more parasympathetic fibers there. And then we get more immune modulation via nitric oxide production, when we more efficiently take on oxygen. So the practices then that particularly I explore, and we'll be exploring in the session on Wednesday, which will be bringing somatics into yoga as well, for those reasons I've started to go through, but I will illuminate more then. Practice helping so many ways, fascia, fluid body, the whole ways through both the anamaya kosha, the physical body, but the fluid body also equated with the breath body, the pranamaya kosha, within yoga and Ayurveda. So a lot of these practices will free tension in tissues to help support us coming to this parasympathetic healing, rest and digest tones, where we can have digestive function, healthy gut microbiome, encouraging lymphatic flow, diaphragmatic movement and lung tissue movement, fascial movement for gut motility, moving gut bacteria through as it's needed to the correct sites, softening our jaw and our throat for oral health. So it's not just about saying, oh, breathe through your nose, it's better for you, but really recognizing where postural habits held in fascial patterns and tissues, which might be stress or trauma related, can start to be met and unraveled with kindness and compassion to start to bring us into more shapes, tones that are more conducive, that allow easy nasal breathing, not as a forced nasal breathing because we should, which adds in pressure and essentially a stressful event in and of itself. But we have more space into the face, the nasal cavities, whole of that area, and the jaw. That allows all systems, orchestration, the organization to come back into balance or homeostasis and appropriate immune responses. And so we'll explore out some of these types of practices. This is a hugging touch rolling around, having that fascial massaging, moving around, that also really ripples through in terms of our neurotransmitters, twisting, moving into the organs, and exploring out any areas of tension that really support us allowing the whole of our organism back into balance. And so there's spine undulations. A quick mention to those at the end, because they're so key for uncoupling tension that we tend to hold into the spine and ripples out from the center outwards into all of those places. So it's partly about communication through the whole gut-brain axis. It's skull sacrum polarity. It's holding us in those areas that a craniosacral therapist will work on, and helping us to have movement in the whole of the diaphragm, around the ribs, the lungs, the gut, right up into the oral cavity, the nasal cavity, ear space, and all of these places where the microbiome is housed. Lovely. So as I said, there's more of those in my current book, Yoga Therapy for Digestive Health, and Yoga and Somatics for Immune and Respiratory Health. So I'm going to just stop that share for the moment in case any of you have any questions. So if you do have any questions, put them in the chat box if you like. If I can get a gallery view here. Okay. Well, thank you very much. Thank you for being here. I will continue this exploration in the Wednesday session on exploring somatics, and introduction to somatics there, and particularly in relation to all of these key factors within our the symphony of our body, our being, and how we can bring conscious embodied awareness in these really explorative ways. So thank you for joining me today for an introduction to yoga for the microbiome on Give Back University. You can learn more about my work. I'll find a schedule of my upcoming events on my website, charlottewattshealth.com, and find more Give Back talks, classes, and workshops at gby.university/schedule. And remember, all the funds raised through Give Back Yoga University support not-for-profit yoga projects in prisons, hospitals, and community care centres. So your money's going to a great cause, and thank you for being here, and thank you for those lovely comments. Very, very nice to hear. So wish you well, you and your microbiome, and hope to see you on Wednesday.